Hello and welcome to DreamDivorce.tv. This is a YouTube channel where we get educated and consider the options in getting divorced so that you don't just in a knee-jerk, unconscious way hire lawyers to fight about it and beat the crap out of each other, because that can be expensive and painful and time-consuming, and maybe you don't want to do that. So I know a lot of people are concerned about the time here in coronavirus and what can you do about getting divorced in this moment when we are in a lockdown and courts are closed and all that kind of thing. And my message for you always is that one thing you can definitely do is to get educated about the process, understand and get educated about your choices, and if you can, talk about your divorce and how it's going to go down with your spouse before you move out, before you create more conflict and start fighting or cheating or doing any of that stuff. Today I want to talk about filing for divorce, which everyone thinks is the first step, and you're right, it is the first step, kind of, but what is that step and what does it mean and what do you need to know to do it? So what we're going to talk about today is the divorce summons, the divorce petition, the proof of service, and the option, which is the response. That's where the legal process starts. So the place that everyone begins is the summons. Now, before I say anything else, I just want to let you know, I'm going to tell you about my experience working in California. Every state is different. It definitely makes sense to research this for your state, but in general, this is the way it goes. Now, the summons is a notice from the court to your spouse or whomever that you are suing them. The summons is to call the other person to the court to respond. In California, when you file the summons for divorce, on the second page, there are a bunch of automatic restraining orders. Now, those automatic restraining orders are great. They help protect people. What you should know is that it applies to your spouse and also applies to you. Those automatic restraining orders have to do with not taking your kids out of the state, not making any big financial transactions. So the automatic restraining orders will prevent your spouse from grabbing the kids, grabbing the money, and running. Just to note, they will also prevent you from grabbing the kids and grabbing the money and running. Maybe you saw that movie, A Marriage Story, where they started talking about it, getting divorced, and then the mom and the kid moved to California and the dad was still in New York, and then that created a problem with him. If they had filed first, she wouldn't be allowed, she wouldn't be able to take that kid and go to California. So the restraining orders are there, they're for protection, but they cut both ways. The other thing that happens with the summons is that it begins the timeline. Now, the reason that this is important is once you file the summons and there's a petition, I'll get to that in a minute, the respondent, the other person who's receiving the thing, the person you're suing, has a limited amount of time to respond. I'll talk about this a little more in a minute, but if the other person does not respond to your summons and to your petition, the judge may give you everything that you want. Now, in California, the summons is Form FL-110. When you file the summons, you become the petitioner. You create a petition for the court saying, here's what I would like. And the things that you're asking for in this particular petition are, one, to have your marriage dissolved or annulled or some other kind of ending. Number two, you're asking the court to grant you financial stuff, to divide your property in a way that is fair and equitable, and you're going to write that down. And number three, you're going to ask for things for your kids to make sure they stay protected and that they're cared for. Now, there's one other thing that goes into the petition which is important and you should know about. Actually, it's all important. But one thing I want to mention is they ask for a date of separation. Now, the date of separation is the date when you and your spouse, or you or your spouse, decided that they were not going to work on this marriage anymore and that you wanted a divorce. Now, the date of separation is important not for the emotional parts of your marriage, but for the financial parts, because the date of separation is the last date that the court is going to look at for you having a pool of money and a pool of stuff. After the date of separation, the court will consider that anything that you or your spouse earned or made after that date could be separate property. So the date of separation is not the day that you moved out necessarily. It's not the date that you stopped sleeping together necessarily. It's the date that you choose that you gave up. And the court wants to know when that date is, and the petition is the place where you put it down. One other thing you can do in the petition is to ask the court to restore your original maiden name if you changed your name. So that's something else you can put on the petition. And then you have the proof of service. If you're suing this other person, your spouse, you need to deliver that paperwork personally or have someone deliver it. This is the thing that everyone sees in the movies or in TV where some stranger walks up and says, "You've been served." And that's exactly how it happens. The reason for this is that the court wants to make sure, the court wants you to certify in a legal way that you have delivered the summons and the petition to your spouse, that you have done your duty to make sure that your spouse knows what's happening. I remember the first time I received my papers. It was awful. I knew my wife was gone. I knew she had left, but I didn't know when the papers were coming, or I didn't know if she was going to file. I was still hoping maybe we can get back together. It was October or November. I remember it had gotten dark early and was kind of a little bit chilly in California. And coincidentally, I had a friend visiting, and also for some reason I had to go to the airport like at 8 o'clock that night to fly someplace for a business meeting. And we were kind of headed out the door, and all of a sudden there was a knock. And I said to myself, well, who could that be at 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the evening on a Wednesday? And I opened the door, and there was a stranger, and he said, "Denzel Myers?" I said, "Yes, you've been served." And he handed me the papers. And I think that I was just so in shock. I'm not sure even what I remember. I would like to say that I wanted to throw up, but I was just so floored by the thing. I guess I suspected it was kind of coming, but I wasn't ready. And this was the moment where I was told for sure that it's happening. And I was not expecting that. I remember I went to the airport. It was a flight like at 9 o'clock maybe, 10 o'clock at night. And the plane wasn't very full. I was sitting all the way in the back, like against the window. And the only thing I remember is feeling so incredibly alone and awful that I was hoping the plane would crash. Actually, I was willing the plane to crash. I was trying to crash the plane with my will because I just couldn't deal. The second and third time, I think I was the one that filed. I was the petitioner. Both the second and third divorces for me. But I definitely let my wife know in both cases that I was going to file, that the papers were coming, that checking if that was okay. I told them I didn't want to surprise or shock them. I didn't want to make it any more difficult than it was already. And I wasn't trying to use the filing as a weapon. And that really helped to make things easier. Yeah. Still wasn't easy. Now, one thing about California that I know is not necessarily true about all states, but it is true in a bunch of states, is this issue about no-fault divorce. There's a box on the petition where you are asking for the dissolution of your marriage, and it says why. And what we're going to write is irreconcilable differences. What that means is that you don't have to blame anybody. It doesn't have to be anybody's fault. And most importantly, you don't have to, in court, prove that the other person abused you, cheated on you, lied to you, did something awful, and that's why you want the divorce. You can get divorced without proving that you have a good reason. You can get divorced because you say you want to. And the court doesn't ask you to prove anything more than that. Now, a minute ago, I mentioned that when you file the summons and the petition and then send them to your spouse, that the clock starts. And what that means is that In these documents, it lets your spouse know that he or she has 30 days to respond to your petition. Now, one of two things can happen. It's pretty simple at this level. Number one, if your spouse does not respond, he or she receives the paperwork, they know what's happening, you've said that to the court. If that person does not respond and join the case, the judge may feel free to grant you everything that you asked for in that petition. So, one case is where your spouse may be out of state and he or she doesn't really care, and so they just don't respond, and your divorce can proceed, and you can get divorced without the other person at all. And so maybe that means that your spouse got your petition, looked at what you were asking for, he or she had no problem with any of that, and they are going to not respond so that the court can just give you what you requested. Now, if your spouse or you decides to join the case as the respondent, that's okay. You still have plenty of choices. One choice is always the respondent is going to fight, hire lawyers, and make this as difficult and challenging as possible. And for some people, that's exactly the right thing to do. You have a complex marriage, you have a complex financial situation, you have kids, you have houses, pension plans. It's not going to be easy. You can't agree. Maybe you need to have lawyers. Maybe you need to fight. Maybe you need to have a judge decide. But maybe you don't. So when the respondent joins the case, that means that in the eyes of the court, the case can only be decided in one of two ways. Either by the judge's judgment, that means the judge will decide, or by mutual agreement. And in California, there's a box that you can check that says agreement coming, or we expect this to happen by mutual agreement. And there, all you're telling the court is, we're going to try to work it out. We're going to try to make this happen. We'll get back to you with what we think is the best plan, so you don't have to decide on your own. Now, if you choose this route, there are multiple options even in this route. Number one is a mediated divorce settlement, where you and your spouse hire a mediator, a third party who doesn't work for either of you separately but works for you both. And that person, the mediator, he or she, will look over all your finances, listen to what you have to say, ask for what you both want, and they will try to help you by suggesting some options that he or she thinks is fair and equitable, and you're either free to take them or you're free to ignore them and take some other process. But that's what mediation is. Another path is a collaborative divorce, and I've mentioned that before in this channel, and basically there you hire a team of experts. It could be an accountant, a realtor, a pension expert, a child care expert, and those people will, again, work for you together, work for you as a couple, and they will bring their expertise to bear to help you understand what are the issues, what's really happening in your dissolution, in breaking your marriage and your financial partnership and your parenting partnership. If you're breaking that apart, what does that mean and what are you going to do about it? So your team with a collaborative process will help you to figure out all these things and will help you to come together to make an agreement that works for both of you. A divorce agreement that works for both of you. Yes, that's totally possible. And then with the mediator or the collaborative team, we'll put together an agreement that says, here's what we would like to do. Here's how we would like to get divorced. And the judge in almost every case will look at that and say, oh, you guys found a way to agree? Great. Let me stamp that and get it off my desk. That's a great way to get divorced. I have taken a process like that myself all 3 times. We actually didn't hire a mediator and we didn't hire any other professionals because we didn't have a lot of money and it wasn't that complex. But I did a lot of research, we both did, and I bought a book and I did all the paperwork myself all 3 times. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm just letting you know that it is possible. And also that I am grateful that my 3 ex-wives, even though obviously we were not getting along, and this process, by the way, was not calm. It wasn't easy. We were both upset, in pain, freaked out a lot of the time, and we got angry, sure, but we did it, and we did it together, and we did it in a way that was easier than making it harder. Now, in terms of getting educated and understanding your options, again, every state is a little bit different, so it really makes sense to research what is happening in your state and the laws that apply. At the same time, there's a company called Nolo.com, and they publish a wide variety of DIY, do-it-yourself legal books on all kinds of topics. One of their topics is divorce, and they have, I believe, 7 different books in their collection about understanding divorce and doing your own divorce. Nolo.com, I will put some information, maybe a link in the description so you can check those books out. We do make a little bit of money if you buy one of those books. At the same time, I certainly would not recommend them if I did not think that they were useful and also the best and most up-to-date books about divorce that you can get in America. Now, one of the books that I used when I was doing at least 2 of my 3 divorces is this one. It's called How to Make Any Divorce Better, and it's by a guy named Ed Sherman. Ed Sherman has really pioneered the DIY divorce movement. He started in Berkeley, California in the 1970s, and he has been working, I guess that's like 50 years now, to help make any divorce easier, better, kinder, and gentler. This has been his life's work. One of the things that he says in this book, which I think is really useful, is if you are ready, if you're going to file the summons and the petition, let your partner know. Talk about your divorce before you start to get divorced. I mean, I don't know, but I think a lot of people just get angry and walk out, and they get confused and scared, or they have a big fight, or somebody's cheating, and then they say, I'm going to file for divorce. And you can do it. You can do it that way, and that's all great. But if your partner is surprised and caught off guard by receiving the summons and the petition, if they're caught off guard by that stranger knocking on the door and saying, you've been served, and handing them the summons and the petition, it's just going to make your divorce process more difficult. On the other hand, if you can have a conversation with your insignificant other saying, okay, we're going to get divorced. How would we like to do it? Who wants to be the petitioner? Who wants to be the respondent? By the way, it doesn't matter who's the petitioner and who's the respondent, but yes, it is emotionally charged. Who is the person who wants the divorce and who is the person who has to respond, either to defend or to participate or something. It's a very emotional decision. Who is the petitioner and who is the respondent? Maybe you want to have that conversation with your spouse. And maybe you want to say, well, even though it's me the one that's leaving, how about if you want to be the petitioner, you can, or you want me to be the petitioner, I can. It's a way to start to work together right away from the very beginning about getting the divorce and making the divorce happen. All of that, in theory, is a way to soften the impact, the emotional impact of the divorce. So it doesn't feel so much like being kicked to the curb, and it even feels like something that we can do together because this is the right thing for us. Now, I know that that story is not going to work for everybody and not for everybody's situation, but you get my point. If the divorce is a surprise to your spouse, it's probably going to be harder, more painful, and more expensive than if you and your spouse try to work it out and talk about it together. Now look, when you look at these legal forms about divorce that come from your local court, if you're not a lawyer, they may look crazy, intimidating, and complex, and they are a little bit. But if you do some research and you read about them, you will start to see that it's actually not that difficult to do. If you need some help from a document preparation service, which is not a lawyer, but people that do legal forms to help people who are doing their own legal stuff, you can even hire that person. Obviously, you can hire a lawyer. You're not divorced yet. Why not work on your divorce together as a couple to make it as smooth and positive and good for everybody in the future as you possibly can? It's so easy to look at the divorce process and the settlement, especially going in front of a judge, as a way to right some wrongs or to rebalance some things that happened in the past or to get revenge or any of that stuff. Personally, I think that's a mistake. What you really should be thinking about in a divorce is not the past, but the future. How are your kids going to be in the next 10 years? Are they going to be cared for financially and emotionally and have all the parenting that they need? And how about you? What's your financial situation going to be after the divorce? What's your retirement plan going to look like? Those are the more important things than looking back and hoping that the judge will teach that other person a lesson because they were so horrible, and then you're going to get a lot of something. That's kind of not really the way it works, and that's not the way that you should be thinking about it. So these are all the things that you can do during coronavirus, during lockdown, to get your divorce together. So thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm sorry you're getting divorced, but honestly, the best thing that you can do when you're getting divorced or think you want to get divorced is to do some research, and if it's safe, talk to your spouse about the divorce before you just start to file and throw lawyers and money around. That's my suggestion. Again, not possible for everybody, but if it's possible for you, you should definitely consider it. This is DreamDivorce.tv. Love your divorce for the rest of your life. I've been divorced 3 times. They were all brutal. But you know what? Looking back, retrospectively, wow, I super lucked out. I do. I love my divorces. I love them. This is DreamDivorce.tv. Love your divorce for the rest of your life. Yeah, I do. I do love my divorces. They were way better than they could have been.